Bill Curry played in the National Football League for Coach Vince Lombardi, and he coached college football for 17 years at Alabama and at Kentucky. He is currently a game analyst for ESPN. Good evening, Bill. Jessica Kavora is a senior policy advisor at the Department of Justice. In her book, Tilting the Playing Field, she criticizes the current application of Title IX as discriminatory and beyond the original intent of the law. Good evening, Jessica. Let's begin, I think, by setting the end zones, and that might be the right analogy for this debate this evening, Nancy. Title IX is needed now more than ever because...
Well, because of so many stereotypes that are being perpetuated since we just saw in the last hour-long documentary. The same arguments are being sort of perpetuated, but even at a stronger point now. So things like women aren't interested in sports, or that Title IX is hurting men's sports. Those kinds of myths are detrimental, and it's because of the law that we have athletic directors who can't just arbitrarily say we're just going to cut women's sports.
Okay, Jessica, Title IX, in your view, has become what?
Well, we've talked a lot this weekend on ESPN and elsewhere about the achievements of women in sports and education, and this is definitely a weekend to mark them, and I associate myself with them. But in the past 10 years, Title IX has taken a wrong turn. Title IX has become a quota law, the Q word, I'll use it. It has become, I would take issue with your introduction. There aren't three ways to comply with Title IX today. There really is one way, the proportionality, the quota test. It's not about whether or not men and women are more or less interested in sports. It's about accommodating interests and acknowledging interests. Title IX today doesn't.
Let's first, for the folks at home, explain proportionality, just so people have an idea what we're going to be talking about, Nancy. We have a graphic to illustrate, for example, on a college campus, 55% student body are women, 45% men, then the total roster spots must roughly mirror that, within a percentage point.
No, not must. That's one way that they can come into compliance, not must.
Well, now Jessica just said that essentially, realistically, is the only way. Is she wrong?
The OCR in the last...
OCR is the Office of Civil Rights, Department of Education.
The Office of Civil Rights. For the last 74 reviews that they did, only 21 of those schools actually used prong one, it's called, proportionality, as a way to come into compliance. The rest of the schools used other methods, the two other ways that I'm sure you're going to go over in just a second to come into compliance. So,
is proportionality a quota?
Okay, not only is it not a quota, but there are now 9 federal circuit courts that have ruled on this issue. And they, number one, uphold the legality of the civil rights regulations, of the Title IX regulations. And two is they expressly say that Title IX is not a quota. There's 1 out of 3 ways that schools can come into compliance with Title IX. If you don't have a measuring system, you're never going to know whether or not somebody's being discriminated against or not.
The other 2 ways are basically showing that you have a history of advancing the ability of women athletes to take advantage,
or that we've added a softball program.
Why are schools taking advantages of those last 2 prongs, Jessica? Or are
no, and I think for good reasons. Listen, when the federal government says that the quota standard is the safe harbor for schools, schools and their lawyers take note. They don't miss that. And when Brown University, which offered the second most generous program to women of any school in the country, was sued under Title IX and lost, schools notice. This is the real world. It's not words in a regulation book.
Well, it's been reduced in many regards to a numbers game, at least those that would make the proportionality argument. Let me show you some numbers for just a second. Looking at football, college football is the bogeyman here in many of these debates. For example, the year 2000, Bill Curry, I want you to talk about this because you've coached at Kentucky, you've coached at Alabama. Nebraska dressed 202 players. Houston down to 151. Even the national champion Oklahoma team had over 120 players. My goodness, because any one of those people, even if they're a walk-on, there then has to be a proportionate woman athlete, which means some say that the small male teams are falling by the wayside. How do you need 200 football players?
Well, nobody needs 200 football players, but there was a time when almost everybody had 200. When I played at Georgia Tech in the early 60s, we had 200 players. Most of Nebraska's extra players are walk-ons, and that is a unique scenario. Nobody else. I sat with Tom Osborne in his stands at spring practice and watched 6 different scout teams run on the field, and that's why they're in the national championship so often. So that's not a good illustration of what most programs are like, nor is Division 1A indicative of most football programs. Most football programs are not scholarships. 17.2% of our programs are 1A football programs, and in those programs, under the enormous pressure that we place on the student athletes, in those programs, if we're going to play 13, 14 games and have a national championship, whether it's mythical or otherwise, then we need the 85 scholarships. And for people who have never played football to indicate otherwise simply is not the wisest way to make this decision.
You've been in a lot of dialogues about this topic. Do you think the other side of the table from this, those that would blame college football for the Title IX problems with these small men's teams being let go, are those people making an honest attempt in your mind to understand college football?
Yes. I think there are really sincere, well-informed people on both sides of this issue, and that's what we have to believe. You have to believe. I would hope that we could win the trust of our honest opponents, and most of them are honest and well-informed. I would hope that football coaches would stop being so arrogant and cut out some of our stupid expenditures so as to win the trust of those who don't trust us now and be convinced that we're capable of telling you how many players we need in order to fund the programs the way they are. If you want to cut the schedule back and play 8 or 9 games and not do all this championship machinations, yes, you could reduce scholarships.
Let's get a question from our audience. We have a question here at microphone 2.
My name is John Heinz Peter from Mount Vernon High. I participate in football, wrestling, and golf. My question is, if men's sports bring in more revenue to a school, why should women's sports share in that revenue?
Why should women's sports share in the revenue that men's sports bring in? Well, Gino, you bring in a fair amount of women's revenues to the UConn. Address that question.
Well,
into the same till.
It's you really can't differentiate who brings the revenue in and then who gets to spend it. It's kind of like in a household, you know. If one person's working and bringing in money, it's for the whole household to be able to do what they have to do. An athletic department is supposedly run like that, where generally, whether it's a football program or basketball program, whatever it is, that brings in the revenue, all the other sports then get to share in the revenue so that they can do what they need to do.
Nancy?
Also, some of those programs are able to bring in money is because they have a long history of having funded and promoted and supported that sport. That women's sports, you know, we're just getting started, and it's unrealistic to expect women's sports who are 10 years old now to be able to bring in that kind of money. I mean, how many years have you all been bringing in money now in Connecticut?
Yeah, when we first decided to charge,
Which seems amazing since you sell out every game now.
1994, I think it was, we sold tickets, so that's less than, what, 8 years ago. People in our own athletic department, in our own circle, were saying, you got to be crazy to do that. Nobody's going to come to the games anymore. We were averaging about 2,000, 3,000 people a game. Once we started charging, then all of a sudden we started selling out, and we get on television. Now tickets are $20 a game.
Bob, I think the gentleman's question gets to the point of football making money. And I think it's very important that people realize that most college football programs lose money. 80% of college football programs, all college programs, lose money.
Division I, though.
Division I.
These are the big schools that drive the engine.
Division I-A, the statistics say that 1/3 lose money, 2/3 make money. So the notion, which obviously is one of the key elements of those who are against Title IX, or the proportionality test, is that football is bringing in all this money for all these other programs. It's just not true.
Jessica, go ahead. Jessica.
Well, if I could just say, I mean, this discussion of money is fine, but it's also beside the point. Look, Title IX is, the quota deals with bodies on the playing field, not resources. And one of the major ways men's opportunities are limited under Title IX today is by roster management, capping men's teams. Now, when you turn away non-scholarship players that don't cost colleges and universities much money at all, you're doing so not because football's spending too much money or not making enough money. You're doing so because you have a quota over which men's participation cannot go and under which women's participation cannot go.